What's up, y'all? Hope y'all doing good. I'm Anthony K. Thomas, and you know what? Today's a good day to talk about love. So let's talk about love. Welcome to my social media book tour for my book, Life in Love. To kick this off, let me tell you a little something about Life in Love. Life in Love is a love story. It's a story about how life and love can work with each other and against each other. It's a story about Robin and Alice who unexpectedly meet each other on a very late night in a diner in San Bernardino. They eventually fall in love, and the things that they are working towards in their life separately eventually happens, and also eventually takes them down very different paths. And you go through this story. As you go through the story, you go through what they're going through in their own life separately, and it leaves the question, which gets answered, of course, in this book. Can will they find each other in their life again? Can life and love coexist? The idea for Life and Love came at a very late night in June in 2025. I was in the middle of finishing up a book called Fighting for My Life, which is a very different story. There's some love. There's a hint of a love story in that story, but it's primarily a story about a character named Vincent who is battling cancer. And as he's battling cancer, you see how cancer affects not only him, but the people in his life, from his family to his friends. And there's a bit of a love story in there that I begin the story with and then come back to it the very end of that story. And that story kind of gives you closure to what happens in that little love story I tell between Vincent and his girlfriend. And it also answers a question of whether or not Vincent survives his cancer. And as I was finishing that book, it was about 1 o'clock at night, and I couldn't sleep. Normally at 1 o'clock at night, I'm watching Late Night with Seth Meyers. After I watch the Tonight Show, sometimes I'll watch a full episode as well of Late Night with Seth Meyers. Sometimes I'll just go as far as the first segment, like I'll do the monologue, and sometimes he'll do a closer look. And then depending on the guests, we'll determine whether or not, and if I'm not too tired to stay up and watch the full episode. But I couldn't sleep, and Seth Meyers, that whole week of late night television was in repeats. So I just laid in the dark, tried to sleep, and an idea for a story just came into me. And usually that's when it happens. A lot of the ideas for stories that I have, they either come to me in the shower or very late at night when it's completely dark and completely quiet, and pretty much the entire neighborhood is asleep. And that is where some of the ideas for a story I have come to me. They also sometimes come to me while I'm driving, and as I'm driving, I have to hit pause on the music and get the notes app going, and then voice this idea for a story. So like the ideas for stories that I have, they mostly come at some of the most oddest and some of the oddest places and at the weirdest times. And this story, Life and Love, came to me very late at night after 1 a.m. And I write this story about this guy who can't sleep. The melatonin isn't working. The sleepy time tea isn't working. So he decides to put on some jeans, put on his sneakers, a hoodie, a beanie, goes for a drive, doesn't care where he's going, and he ends up at a stop sign, and at that stop sign there is a diner, 24-hour diner. He figures, what the hell, I can eat something. Goes and gets something to eat, and there she is. There's this waitress, and they meet, and she brings him some pie and some decaf coffee. He eats the pie, drinks his coffee, but there's this look on his face that she can see that something is wrong. And after she gets off work, instead of going home, she goes and sits down at the table he's at, and they begin to have this conversation. And there's a little bit of dialogue that I wrote, and that was it. And I went back and I finished Fighting for My Life, and I went on and did a few mock memoirs. I did a good versus evil story in The Freshman, and then 2026 came around, and I was in the middle of finishing Darkness, which is now available. And then after I finished Darkness, I felt like I needed to make a return to love stories, but to write a different kind of love story. And I was sitting on my MacBook for a while wondering what kind of love story I was going to write. And then I remembered the little thing that I wrote in my iPad back in June. And I opened it up and I looked at it, and it all came back to me, like right there in that moment. And I copied and pasted what I had onto the MacBook, and on the iPad onto the MacBook, and then I just kind of went from there. I really just went from there. I changed some things and added a place where the majority of the story takes place in, San Bernardino, and I kind of went from there. And here we are, Life and Love. Now, why San Bernardino? Well, I'm a California kid, born and raised in California. Pardon me. I love this. I love this state, and yes, it's too expensive. It's very expensive to live in right now, but I couldn't see myself living anywhere else. So whenever I write these stories, for the most part, I'm writing stories of places within California. Like there's a lot of stories that I've written that take place in Santa Rosa or in Sonoma, because I am from the county of Sonoma. I'm proud of that. I grew up in Glen Ellen and Sonoma. I went to kindergarten in Dunbar. Elementary was El Verano Elementary School. Middle school was Altamira Middle School. High school was Sonoma Valley High School. And Sonoma is my first home. It will always be home to me. Even when I go for a drive, and sometimes I go into Sonoma, there's so much that has changed since I was a kid in Sonoma, but it's still my home. It's still a place I'm very familiar with, a place I still love. And sometimes when we have this Chinese restaurant we have two actually. We have one place called Golden Springs, and then we have another place called Amy's in Sonoma. And whenever I'm in Sonoma, and sometimes I can't leave Sonoma without going to Amy's over there and get some Chinese food, get some teriyaki chicken, get some of the rice with chicken in it, get some of the chow mein. Sometimes I can't leave Sonoma without getting that. I used to get it all the time when I was growing up, and especially in high school, I would get it all the time. But anyway, Sonoma, Santa Rosa, sometimes Los Angeles. But then there are other times where I'll write a story that takes place in London, like I did for my love story, a walk through London, which starts in between Santa Rosa and Rohnert Park, a little bit in San Francisco, but then takes you to London, and you're in London for most of the time. Or another story like Dear Love, which is a love story that takes place between New York and Crawford, New Jersey. So I don't just stay in California. I love California, but I will explore other cities and states for a story to take place in, just to throw that out there. But for the most part, representation is a big part of every book I write. So every book that I write, there is always going to be a biracial character in my books, because I I am biracial, and I never had that kind of representation growing up. When you grow up when I was born in 1983, October 15th, 1983. I am a Libra. Um, and I grew up in that time, in the 80s, in the 90s, and even a little bit in the 2000s. There really wasn't much representation, or sometimes not at all. In the books that I would read, in the music that I would listen to, there wasn't much as far as the representation in biracial people. As far as I knew as a kid, the only biracial person that I knew of was Mariah Carey. And then in the movies that I watched as well, I didn't see it or recognize representation as far as biracial people. So as I grew up, and writing was the thing that I really love. I mean, I love entertainment, period. Get me on a stage, I will do what I can on that stage as far as trying to entertain people. I love that, but my first love is writing. So when I really started writing over the years, because I started writing, my first story I wrote, I was in middle school. But as far as representation and all that stuff came much later in my life, in my 30s and into my 40s. So when I started writing stories, representation really became an important thing that I needed to add into my books, as far as having biracial characters in my book. And I feel that that's important, because I feel like, especially in the world we live in today, there are so many more biracial people in this world that are half black, half white, or half Hispanic, and half Hispanic or white, half whatever. And I feel that having biracial characters, whether they're the lead or the co-character or a supporting character, there's always going to be biracial characters in my books. And I make sure I do that. It's important that I do that. For me, it's very important that I do that, because I want people who read my books, be it children or teenagers or adults, to see that representation of biracial people for them, if they are biracial, or if they know someone who's biracial, or if they have a child who's biracial, they see that representation and say, that person's like my child, that person's like me. So that's always been important. But Life and Love has a biracial character, Robin. He's a preschool teacher who eventually leaves being a preschool teacher and takes on writing full time, because it's something he loves. I put a little bit of myself in every book I write as well. So and excuse me. And Alice is a Hispanic woman who has a child at a very young age, right after high school, and raises that child on her own as a single parent. Sometimes it takes a village, and she has that village in her parents and her brothers and one of her close friends. But she's also going to school to become a social worker. And after Robin and Alice meet, things in their life eventually happens. Alice finishing school and becoming a social worker, and things happening for Robin as a writer, as the spotlight is being finally thrown on him, and he's finally getting these opportunities that he's been working so hard as an independent writer. He's finally getting noticed for, and it feels good when that happens. I can't speak for that personally, because that hasn't happened for me yet. I'm still here, I'm still grinding, and I'm never gonna stop. Just inching my way closer until I can get close to that door and kick it all the way down, which is something Robin does. And eventually Robin's and Alice's lives take them in very opposite directions. And as you go through the book, you wonder if life will bring Robin and Alice's love back together. And you go through that wondering that. So what I want to do now in reading, I want to read just a little something from Life and Love before I go. And what I'm gonna read is just like a little bit from the intro of this book, which is called A Hello from a Stranger. A young 25-year-old biracial man lies in bed trying to sleep, but his insomnia is winning on this particular night. The nature-made melatonin isn't working, and the Bigelow Sleepy Time tea isn't working either. He gets out of bed, puts his slippers on, and walks down the hallway in his apartment and looks out the window near his front door. He can see cars parked in their parking spots, and he can hear crickets serenading the night. In the moment, he decides to go back in his room and change into his jeans, put his sneakers on, grabs a hoodie and a beanie to put on his head, grabs his keys and wallet as he walks out of his apartment. He sits in his car and thinks if he should leave or not. Feeling like Cameron Fry in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, he weighs the pros and cons in his head on whether he should leave or go back into his apartment. Sitting in his car for 10 minutes, he says out loud, "Fuck it," and starts the engine and drives. He has no idea where he's going. He allows the feeling of where he thinks he should go to take him there. When he pulls up to a stop sign, he sees a 24-hour diner. His stomach begins to growl for a late night snack, and he thinks a slice of pie sounds good to him. He parks his car in the diner parking lot and goes into the diner and finds a table to sit at. At the diner, it's fairly empty. There are a few people sitting at the booth and sitting at tables eating and keeping to themselves. A Hispanic waitress with brown hair and a ponytail walks up to his table and asks him if there is anything that he would like. He looks up at the waitress, smiles, and says he'll have a cup of decaf coffee and a slice of apple pie. When the waitress comes back with his decaf coffee and slice of apple pie, he thanks the waitress as he grabs his fork and napkin. Life is filled with chances and opportunities, and it's on us to make what we can of those chances and opportunities. Little something from My Life in a Nutshell. My Life in a Nutshell is now available on barnesandnoble.com and on Amazon. There is a Linktree link in my bio that will take you to my Linktree page where you will see Life and Love, as well as many other books and short stories I have available now. This has been my social media book tour for Life and Love. I appreciate all of you for watching, for listening, and I hope all you have a good, fun, and safe week. Thanks for sitting with me as I talk a little bit about love and about life and love. And don't forget to take care of yourselves. I will see you on that next one. Peace, y'all.